The black bride begged, her voice a raw whisper against the wind's scream. "Will you protect me?" The mountain man's weathered hands tightened on his rifle, the oiled wood smooth and familiar against his calloused skin. Snow whipped through the open cabin door, a blast of pure, white fury. He didn't look at the men outside, the shadows circling in the blizzard. He looked only at her. "Only if you're my wife." The words were not a proposal. They were a contract, hard as iron and cold as the grave. To the bounty hunters out there in the storm, she was nothing more than escape property, a line item on a ledger worth $300 dead or alive. To the folks in the nearest settlement, she'd be in shackles by sunrise. Another runaway, crushed by the territory's unforgiving justice. They'd whisper about it over breakfast and forget her by lunch. But the grizzled hermit, the man who'd buried his own wife and daughter in these same mountains, recognized something else in her desperate dark eyes. He saw the same fierce, stubborn will to survive that had kept him breathing through 5 brutal winters alone. It was a language he understood better than words. What neither the hunters nor the mountain man knew was that sewn into the very fabric of her tattered dress were surveyor's maps. Not just any maps, but secrets worth more than all the gold in the Colorado Territory. Secrets powerful men would kill to possess, and kill again to keep hidden. Would this marriage of survival be their salvation, or would it be the one thing that finally destroyed them both? Could a pact made in desperation forge the one partnership that could bring down the most corrupt judge in the West? The blizzard had been raging for 3 solid days when Mercy Washington finally stumbled upon the abandoned trading post. It appeared like a ghost through the white curtain of snow, a dark shape against an endless canvas of white. Her fingers, numb and useless beneath worn gloves, clutched the leather satchel tighter against her chest. The Colorado Territory stretched out in every direction, an unforgiving beast of rock and ice in the winter of 1867. She shoved her shoulder against the heavy wooden door, the groan of the hinges a sound of victory. Any shelter. That's all she'd prayed for. The air inside was thick with the ghosts of old tobacco and a decade of dust. Empty shelves lined the walls like skeletal ribs. A great stone fireplace dominated one corner, as cold and dark as a tomb. Mercy sank onto a wooden crate, the exhaustion of physical weight pressing down on her shoulders, threatening to splinter her bones. The freedom papers were tucked safely in her coat pocket. They were legal, they were legitimate. But Captain Wade Morrison and his dogs didn't seem to care much for legal documents. They'd been hunting her for 6 days straight, their voices carrying on the wind, calling her escape property. Their horses had been gaining ground, their hot breath misting in the cold, right before the storm hit and saved her. For now, Mercy opened her satchel, her frozen fingers fumbling with the latch. She had to check. She always had to check. Inside, maps and surveys, meticulously rolled and protected by oiled cloth, filled every inch of space. They were years of her life, years of painstaking work, recording mining claims and geological surveys across the entire territory. Her former employer, the powerful Judge Garrett, had trusted her completely. He'd praised her sharp mind and steady hand, never once suspecting she understood the true, staggering value of the documents she copied and filed away. He never suspected she was making copies of her own. The door didn't just open, it exploded inward. A tall man filled the frame, his rifle raised and ready, the barrel pointed right at her heart. Ice crystals clung to his dark, thick beard. His eyes, sharp and suspicious as a hawk's, swept the empty room before locking onto her. They missed nothing. "This is my supply cache." His voice was a low rumble, the sound of gravel and disuse. It held the raw authority of a man accustomed to solitude and silence. "You're trespassing." Mercy got to her feet slowly, making sure her hands were visible, empty. "I mean no harm. I was just seeking shelter from the storm." His gaze moved over her, dissecting her. He saw the torn dress, the worn-out boots, the fierce, protective way she held that satchel. His eyes narrowed. "You're being followed." It wasn't a question, it was a fact. Mercy could only nod. Her throat was too tight for words. "Bounty hunters. 3 miles back, maybe less now." He moved to the small, grimy window, peering out into the white chaos. He was a part of the landscape, still and watchful. "They've been circling this area for hours. I've seen their tracks. Captain Morrison's crew, she managed to say. They're asking about a runaway. His gaze snapped back to her face, pinning her in place. That you? Mercy lifted her chin, a spark of defiance cutting through the fear. I'm a free woman. I have the papers to prove it. A bitter, humorless smile touched his lips. Papers don't mean much out here. He lowered the rifle, but only an inch. Morrison's got territorial warrants. Claims you stole property. I stole nothing. The man walked to the cold fireplace, kicking at the old ashes with the toe of his boot. Doesn't matter what's true. Only matters what he can prove in a crooked court. Then they heard it. The thunder of hoofbeats, muffled by the snow but growing louder. Closer. Morrison's voice cut through the wind, barking orders to his men. The tiny cabin, once a shelter, suddenly felt like a cage, a trap about to spring. Please. Mercy took a step toward the stranger, her hands clasped together. I need protection. He turned, his eyes calculating, weighing her, judging her. Protection costs. I can pay. Not talking about money. He moved back to the door, his hand resting on the heavy wooden latch. Frontier law is simple. An unmarried woman has no legal standing. Can't testify in court. Can't own property. Can't refuse a lawful arrest, even a fraudulent one. The hoofbeats were circling the cabin now, the horses snorting just outside the walls. Mercy's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. The mountain man faced her fully, his expression grim. But a married woman, a wife, has her husband's legal protection. She can't be taken without his consent. The understanding dawned on her, cold and sharp as an icicle. You're saying... She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm saying marriage is the only law Morrison has to respect out here. The words hung between them, a blade suspended in the air. Outside, Morrison's men were dismounting. Their voices were clearer now, their intentions unmistakable. Mercy clutched her satchel, the maps inside a secret weight, a dangerous promise. I don't even know your name, she whispered. Ezra Stone. Been living in these mountains 5 years. He jerked his head toward the shouting voices. You've got about 30 seconds to decide, Mercy Washington. She closed her eyes, the options flashing before her. Morrison would drag her back in chains. The territorial judge, the man she was running from, would laugh as he tore up her freedom papers. She'd disappear into his system, another forgotten soul crushed under the weight of his corruption, or she could take the hand of this dangerous stranger, this mountain man with ghosts in his eyes. She opened them. Yes, Ezra nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. He strode to the door and slammed the heavy wooden bar into place. Then you're under my protection now, Mrs. Stone. Heavy boots stomped onto the wooden porch. A fist pounded against the door, the force of it shaking the entire cabin. Stone, open up! We know she's in there! Ezra cracked the door open just enough for the rifle barrel to be visible in the gap. Captain Morrison, what brings you to my property in this godforsaken weather? Got a federal warrant for the woman you're harboring in there, Stone? Hand her over, and we'll be on our way. What woman? Ezra's voice was casual, almost bored. Don't play games with me, mountain man. We tracked her right to this door. Tracked who? Ezra stepped fully outside, pulling the door closed behind him, leaving Mercy alone in the sudden, tense silence. She pressed her ear to the cold wood, her breath held tight in her chest. Her new husband was buying her time, but Morrison was a wolf, and he'd smelled blood. She heard Ezra's voice again, louder this time, carrying over the wind with a new, hard edge of ownership. That's my wife you're talking about, Captain, and I'd thank you to speak of her with respect. A stunned silence. Mercy could almost hear Morrison's mind working, trying to process this new, impossible twist. Your wife? Morrison's tone was sharp with disbelief, laced with mockery. The hermit of Mount Bannon got himself hitched? Man gets lonely up here. Ezra's voice was smooth as creek water. Found myself a good woman. We were married proper by a traveling preacher this morning. She's a runaway slave, Stone, worth $300 to her rightful owner in Denver. She's a free woman with papers to prove it, and she's my legal wife. Ezra's boots creaked on the porch boards. So you want to take her, you'll need a hell of a lot more than some trumped-up territorial warrants. You'll need to go through me. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Mercy counted her own heartbeats, a frantic rhythm against the howling of the storm. 1, 2, 3. This ain't over, Stone. Morrison's voice was a low snarl. Never thought it was. She heard the horses moving away, but not far. Morrison wasn't retreating. He was regrouping. He was planning. Ezra came back inside, his face a grim mask. He secured the door with 2 more heavy wooden bars, his movements efficient and practiced. They'll be back, he said, moving to gather supplies from hidden caches around the room. Ropes, ammunition, dried rations. Tonight, probably. Maybe sooner. Mercy watched him, her mind reeling. He was moving with a purpose that felt strangely familiar. Why? Why did you help me? Ezra paused, his hand still on a coil of rope. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw past the hardened exterior. She saw the ghosts he lived with. Because everyone deserves a fighting chance, he said quietly. He resumed his packing, but Mercy had seen it, a shadow of old unbearable pain. This man didn't just understand survival, he understood loss. He understood what it was to run from things that could never truly be outrun. The storm continued its assault on the small cabin, but inside a new and dangerous storm was brewing. 2 strangers, bound by a lie, had become allies, and they were about to face a war neither of them could possibly win alone. Morrison's men returned at dusk, just as the last of the gray light faded from the sky. They didn't come back to the trading post. They went for the main cabin, 2 miles deeper into the mountains, a fortress of thick logs Ezra had built with his own 2 hands. They were done talking. Now they were here to lay siege. Mercy crouched behind the thick log walls, peering through a small chink. She counted them. 6 men, all armed with rifles, melting into the tree line like wolves in the twilight. They were surrounding the cabin, cutting off any chance of escape. Ezra moved with a chilling, methodical calm. He wasn't panicking. He was preparing. He checked his ammunition, blocked the windows with heavy wooden shutters, and loaded a second rifle. His movements held the quiet confidence of a man who had been expecting this fight for a very long time. They won't wait for morning, he said, his voice low as he secured the last shutter, plunging the cabin into near darkness, lit only by the flickering fire. Morrison's not a patient man. Mercy's satchel lay open on the rough-hewn wooden table. In the firelight, the contents seemed to glow with a dangerous energy. Detailed maps covered every surface, each one marked with precise geological notations and survey measurements that told a secret history of the entire territory. I need to show you something, she said, her voice steady despite the armed men outside. She pulled out the most comprehensive chart, a master map of the region. This isn't just about me being a runaway. It's never been about that. Ezra glanced at the map, his eyes tracing the familiar lines of the mountains he called home. Then he stopped. He leaned in closer, his weathered finger tracing the elevation lines, the mineral markers, the coded symbols she had used. His breath caught. These are mining surveys, he whispered, his voice filled with a stunned disbelief. Complete territorial surveys. This is every major deposit from here to Denver. Mercy's finger jabbed at the map, pointing to dozens of marked locations. Gold, silver, copper, and most of it is on unclaimed federal land. Land that belongs to the people, not one man. Where did you get these? His eyes lifted from the maps and locked onto hers. Judge Samuel Garrett. He owns the largest mining operation in the territory. I worked as his personal record keeper for 3 years. She pulled out another map, this one showing official claim boundaries, a spiderweb of legal lines. He trusted me to file all his surveys and legal documents. He never knew I was making my own copies. Better copies. Ezra studied the intricate markings, the immediate staggering value of it all sinking in. This wasn't just a map. It was a key to a kingdom of wealth beyond imagination. These maps are worth a fortune. Garrett taught me everything, Mercy said, a strange mix of pride and bitterness in her voice. Cartography, geology, even legal documentation. He said I had a natural mind for numbers and measurements. I speak 4 languages. I translated for his business partners from Mexico and Europe. He thought I was his tool. But you kept copies. I kept everything, she said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. She indicated a separate leather portfolio filled with papers. Every survey, every claim, every private correspondence. And when he started falsifying federal reports to hide his profits, I documented those too. A voice cut through the wind outside, sharp and angry. Stone! Send her out now or we're coming and shooting! Ezra ignored the threat completely. His entire world had narrowed to the documents spread across his table. Garrett doesn't know you have these. He thinks they burned. Mercy began to roll up the surveys with careful, practiced hands. He thinks they were destroyed in a warehouse fire 6 months ago. The same fire that supposedly destroyed all the records of his illegal mining claims. Ezra's eyes narrowed. You set that fire. I created that fire, she corrected him, her gaze steady and unflinching. There's a difference. Garrett was cheating territorial prospectors, small-time miners trying to make a life for themselves. He was filing false claims to steal their deposits right out from under them. These maps prove everything. They prove he's the biggest thief in Colorado. A rifle shot suddenly splintered the heavy wooden door, the sound like a thunderclap inside the small cabin. Morrison's patience had finally run out. Ezra didn't flinch. He grabbed his own rifle and moved to a firing position he'd prepared by the front window. He looked back at her, his expression all business. Can you read terrain maps for navigation? In the dark? Better than most surveyors. Then find us a way out of here. He tossed a local topographical chart onto the table. I know every trail in these mountains blindfolded, but you understand elevation, geological formations, the things that aren't on a simple map. Find us a weakness. Mercy spread the terrain map across the floor, her mind racing. She overlaid it with Garrett's own secret surveys, comparing them, her trained eye immediately seeing patterns and connections that would escape any other observer. She saw the land not just as it was, but as it had been. She saw the history written in the rock. Her finger stopped, tracing a faint dotted line. There is a way, a system of mining tunnels, half a mile north of here. She traced the route. It connects to 3 different mountain faces. An old silver mine, long abandoned. Ezra nodded, a grim light in his eyes. I know those tunnels. Haven't been down there in years. They're not safe. According to these surveys, one of the shafts connects to the main road that leads toward Pine Ridge Settlement. She looked up at him, her heart pounding. It's 20 miles southeast of here. Another gunshot shattered the last remaining glass in a window. Morrison's men were getting bolder, testing their defenses, probing for a weak point before their final assault. Ezra shouldered his rifle and returned fire, a single booming shot into the darkness. It wasn't meant to hit anyone. It was a message, a promise. Pine Ridge has a federal courthouse, he said, his mind already moving ahead. If we can get there, we can file the proper marriage certificates. We can file legal complaints against Garrett. He has deep connections throughout the territorial government, but his influence with the federal authorities is weak. Not yet, anyway. He moved to gather their supplies, his movements swift and sure. The territory is pushing for statehood. Federal oversight is getting stronger every day. That's our only chance. Mercy packed the precious surveys, her hands no longer shaking. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was being replaced by a sharp, focused sense of purpose. Morrison isn't just hunting a runaway, she said, finally understanding the full picture. He's working for Garrett. He's here to protect the fraud, which means they cannot, under any circumstances, allow us to reach federal authorities. A third shot punched through the back wall of the cabin, splintering wood just inches from her head. They were surrounded. Morrison was positioning his men on all sides, preparing for a coordinated, final attack. The tunnel entrance is just behind that ridge. Ezra pointed through the rear window. We go now, under the cover of the storm and the darkness, or we don't go at all. Mercy secured the satchel and shouldered a small pack of supplies. How long to reach Pine Ridge? In this weather on foot? Ezra opened the rear door a crack, scanning the darkness. 2 days through those mountain passes, maybe 3 if the snow is deep. I've walked further in worse conditions. He looked at her then, his face illuminated by the dim firelight. He saw the iron in her spine, the fierce determination in her eyes. He finally saw the woman, not the fugitive. "You're not what Morrison thinks you are." "Neither are you," she countered, following him toward the door. "You were a lawman, weren't you?" He paused, his hand on the door, surprised by her perceptiveness. "How did you know?" "The way you handle legal questions, your knowledge of territorial jurisdiction." Mercy adjusted her pack straps. "And the way you talk about Morrison. You know him. There's professional history there." A shadow passed over Ezra's face, the old pain returning. "Territorial deputy. 5 years ago, before I came to these mountains." "What changed?" "I lost my family." His voice was barely a whisper. "A cholera outbreak in Denver. I decided civilization wasn't worth the cost." He pushed the door open, and they slipped out into the howling wind. The snow stung their faces like 1,000 tiny needles. But the storm that had almost killed her was now their greatest ally. It would cover their escape. Behind them, Morrison's shouts echoed from the front of the cabin as he coordinated his men for the final assault. He had no idea his prey was already gone, melting into the darkness, moving through the deep snow toward the black, hungry mouth of an abandoned mine. Mercy followed Ezra's sure footsteps, her cartographer's mind already calculating distances, angles, and elevation changes. The maps in her satchel contained enough evidence to burn Judge Garrett's criminal empire to the ground, but only if they could make it out of these mountains alive. The tunnels were a labyrinth of cold, damp darkness. The air was stale, thick with the smell of wet rock and forgotten history. For 2 days they navigated the treacherous underground passages, their only light coming from a single sputtering lantern. The mountain groaned around them, the weight of it pressing in, a constant low rumble that vibrated through the soles of their boots. Twice small cave-ins blocked their path, forcing them to backtrack through the suffocating blackness, their hearts pounding with the fear of being buried alive. On the second day, they found the body. It was an old skeleton, half buried in rubble, a rusty pickaxe still clutched in its bony fingers. Another prospector who had run afoul of the mountain. Or, Ezra suspected, run afoul of Judge Garrett. They finally emerged from the tunnels, blinking in the harsh daylight, into a world still blanketed in deep snow. They were exhausted, filthy, but they were alive. Below them, nestled in a valley, was Pine Ridge Settlement. Smoke rose from a few dozen chimneys, thin gray columns against the endless white, a fragile sign of civilization in the vast, brutal wilderness. "The federal courthouse is that brick building at the end of town," Ezra pointed, his voice hoarse. "We file the marriage papers first, make it ironclad, then we present the evidence to the federal marshal." As they made their way down the main street, a woman emerged from a building marked with a simple hand-painted sign, "Legal Services." She was tall and severe, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her dress was practical, not fashionable, and she moved with the sharp, no-nonsense confidence of someone accustomed to authority in a lawless land. "That's Helena Cross," Ezra said under his breath. "She handles most of the real legal matters in Pine Ridge. She's tough, but she's fair." Ezra approached her directly, wasting no time. "Mrs. Cross, my name is Ezra Stone. This is my wife, Mercy. We need to file marriage documentation, and we need federal assistance." Helena Cross studied them both with eyes as sharp and penetrating as a surgeon's scalpel. Her gaze lingered on Mercy's satchel. "You're the couple Captain Morrison was asking about yesterday." The words hit them like a physical blow. Morrison had beaten them there. "He came through yesterday morning," Helena continued, her expression unreadable. "Waving territorial warrants, claiming she's escaped property, looking to hire local men to track you in the mountains." "What did you tell him?" Mercy asked, her voice tight. A flicker of something, disdain perhaps, crossed Helena's face. "I told him I'd seen no one matching that description. I don't much care for men like Morrison." She gestured with her head toward her office. "Now get inside, before someone who does care for his money spots you." The office was cramped, the walls lined from floor to ceiling with heavy law books. It smelled of old paper and justice. Helena pulled out official territorial forms, her movements brisk and efficient. As she prepared the marriage documents, Mercy wasted no time. She unstrapped her satchel and spread her most damning surveys across the white oak desk. "This is more than just a false warrant, Mrs. Cross," Mercy began, her finger tracing a series of falsified claim boundaries. "These documents prove systematic mining fraud on a massive scale. Judge Samuel Garrett has been stealing the deposits of legitimate prospectors for at least 3 years." Helena's professional demeanor shifted. She leaned over the maps, her initial curiosity turning to intense, focused interest. Her questions were precise, technical, revealing an extensive and surprising knowledge of territorial mining law. She saw immediately what Mercy was showing her. "You documented everything," Helena breathed, her finger tracing the survey markings. "Dates, measurements, witness signatures. My God, this is hard, courtroom-ready evidence." "I kept meticulous records of every illegal transaction," Mercy said, pulling out a portfolio of correspondence. Garrett never suspected his quiet little record keeper understood the full legal implications of the documents she was filing. Ezra watched Helena, a strange sense of recognition dawning on him. He noted her familiarity with federal procedures, the specific language she used. "You've handled mining fraud cases before." "More than you might expect," Helena said, her eyes still glued to the documents. "The territorial governments are riddled with corruption. Achieving statehood depends on our ability to clean it up before Washington denies our petition." Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside. The sound of horses ridden hard, galloping into town. Riders shouting orders. Morrison. He'd found them. "The back entrance leads to the stable," Helena said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent command. She began gathering the surveys with swift, sure hands. "Take these. Go directly to the courthouse basement. Judge Matthews is there. He's expecting territorial business." Ezra hesitated. "You told him we were coming?" "I sent word the moment Morrison left my office yesterday," Helena confirmed, moving toward the front door as if preparing for battle. "Someone needs to delay the good captain while you get that evidence under federal protection." "He's got 6 armed men with him, Helena," Ezra protested. Helena Cross straightened her shoulders, and for a moment she looked as formidable as the mountains themselves. "And I have territorial law on my side," she said, her voice ringing with defiance. "Morrison's warrants won't hold up under federal scrutiny. Now go!" They slipped out the rear door just as Morrison's heavy boots thundered onto the front porch. His angry voice carried clearly through the wooden walls, demanding information, shouting about fugitives and stolen property. The courthouse basement was a catacomb of territorial records and legal archives. A thin man with graying hair and tired eyes waited for them beside a desk covered with official-looking correspondence. This was Judge Matthews. "Mrs. Cross sent word," he said, his voice quiet and weary. "She mentioned evidence of significant mining fraud." He wasted no time examining the surveys Mercy spread before him. His eyes, though tired, were sharp. "These are remarkably detailed." "It's 3 years of documentation," Mercy explained, pulling out the most comprehensive files. "Every fraudulent claim, every falsified report, every bribed official." Judge Matthews studied the papers, his expertise obvious. "You have a deep understanding of geological surveying." "I learned from the best instructors available," Mercy said, indicating specific measurements on a map. "Judge Garrett himself taught me cartography, legal documentation, even federal filing procedures. He wanted a record keeper who could handle complex territorial business. He created the one person who could expose him." "You were documenting his crimes from the beginning?" "Someone had to keep honest records," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "Garrett was destroying lives. He was stealing from legitimate prospectors, falsifying federal reports, and bribing territorial officials to look the other way." While they spoke, Ezra had been examining the judge's desk. He saw the federal seals, the official letterhead from Washington, D.C. His eyes widened in sudden, stunning realization. "You're not just a territorial judge." Judge Matthews finally looked up from the surveys, a faint, weary smile on his face. "No, I'm not." He tapped the federal seal on a document. "I'm a federal territorial inspector." The revelation hit them like a lightning strike. "You're federal law enforcement," Ezra breathed. "Washington sent me to document irregularities and corruption, throughout the Colorado Territory 8 months ago, Matthews explained. We have to ensure the territory is stable and lawful before it can be considered for statehood. He indicated the stacks of files covering his desk. Judge Samuel Garrett has been under federal investigation since last spring. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with breathtaking speed. And Mrs. Cross? Mercy asked, her mind racing. My lead territorial investigator, Matthews confirmed with a slight smile. Helena has been building cases against corrupt officials across 3 counties for almost a year. She's been waiting for a key piece of evidence, something to tie it all together. He tapped Mercy's maps. And you, Mrs. Stone, have just delivered it. Footsteps thundered on the floorboards overhead. Morrison was searching the courthouse, his voice echoing through the building, growing louder and more frustrated with every passing second. Your evidence completes our case against Garrett, Matthews said, quickly and efficiently securing Mercy's documents in a heavy folder marked Federal Evidence. We needed irrefutable proof of systematic fraud, not just isolated incidents. Morrison is working for Garrett directly, Ezra said, quickly providing his testimony about the pursuit, the threats, the use of false warrants to hunt and silence a federal witness. Matthews wrote rapidly on official forms, his pen scratching furiously. That adds federal charges of kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy to the list. Captain Morrison is now facing 20 years in a federal prison. The basement door creaked open. Helena descended the stairs, her face grim but triumphant. She was followed by 2 broad-shouldered men wearing the unmistakable badges of federal marshals. Morrison is contained upstairs, she announced to Matthews. His warrants are completely falsified. No federal authorization, no legitimate territorial backing, just as we suspected. Garrett's work, obviously, Matthews muttered. Morrison has already confessed, Helena added, a grim satisfaction in her voice. He's admitted to receiving his orders directly from the judge. She then turned to Mercy and Ezra. Your marriage is now legally binding. I filed the papers myself with the federal territorial records. One of the federal agents spoke up, his voice a low growl. We'll need your detailed testimony regarding Garrett's entire mining operation, Mrs. Stone. Mercy pulled out her additional surveys. I can provide 3 years of comprehensive documentation. Every illegal claim, every falsified survey, every bribed official. And we have witness testimony from dozens of legitimate prospectors who were defrauded by Garrett, Helena added, placing her own thick files next to Mercy's on the evidence table. We've been interviewing his victims across the territory for months. When do we arrest him? Ezra asked, the question hanging in the air. Federal warrants have already been issued, Matthews said, sealing the evidence files with official wax stamps. He looked up at them, a hard, determined light in his tired eyes. Judge Samuel Garrett will be in federal custody before sunset. Overhead, Morrison's angry shouting finally faded, replaced by the grim metallic sound of shackles and the calm, authoritative voices of federal agents reading him his rights. The man who had hunted them across the frozen territory was now the one in a cage. Your evidence didn't just save you, Mercy, Helena said, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. It broke open the entire conspiracy. Garrett's criminal network includes at least 12 territorial officials and 6 major mining companies. What happens now? Mercy asked, the reality of their victory slowly sinking in. Now, Judge Matthews said, gathering his official papers, we begin the federal trial in Denver. We begin the full and complete reform of this territory, and your mining surveys, he gave her a meaningful look, become the foundation for legitimate territorial development for decades to come. Outside, the small settlement of Pine Ridge was settling into a quiet evening, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a town no longer living under the shadow of the corruption that had poisoned the territorial government for years. It was the quiet before a new dawn. Judge Samuel Garrett arrived in Pine Ridge the next morning, and he did not come alone. He rode at the head of a contingent of 10 territorial marshals, his imposing figure a black silhouette against the morning sun. A wagon full of official documents followed behind him, a symbol of his power. His long black coat billowed out behind him like storm clouds gathering for a war. Word of his arrival spread through the settlement like wildfire. Shopkeepers stepped out onto their wooden sidewalks. Residents gathered on their porches and at the corners of the main street. Everyone had heard about Morrison's arrest by the Federals, but Garrett's thunderous presence meant the real confrontation was only just beginning. From the second-story window of the courthouse, Mercy watched as Garrett deployed his men with chilling, military precision. They took up positions around key buildings, the courthouse, the telegraph office, the stables. His strategy was methodical, professional. He was isolating the town, controlling every avenue of escape or communication. He was laying a trap. "He's moving fast," Ezra said, joining her at the window, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "He knows his time is limited before more federal agents arrive from Denver." Downstairs in the main courtroom, Helena Cross reviewed the federal paperwork, her movements calm and deliberate despite the palpable tension gripping the town. "Garrett is desperate," she said to Judge Matthews. "Our federal investigation became public knowledge the moment we arrested Morrison. This is his last desperate play." "What is his play?" Matthews asked, examining the deployment of the territorial marshals through a pair of field glasses. "He can't simply override federal authority by force." "He won't try," Helena countered, tapping a stack of forged warrants spread across her command table in the center of the room. "He'll try to create legal chaos. He'll try to arrest Mercy on his territorial charges before our federal hearing can officially conclude. He wants to snatch our star witness right out from under our noses." Garrett's voice, amplified by years of commanding courtrooms, boomed across the settlement square. He stood on the steps of the town's small hotel, addressing the gathered residents with the practiced authority of a king. He spoke of law and order, of dangerous fugitives from Denver, threatening their territorial security, of the sacred need for swift local justice. "Citizens of Pine Ridge," he bellowed, holding up a sheaf of his falsified documents. "I come bearing official territorial warrants for the arrest of a known criminal. This woman," he pointed a dramatic finger at the courthouse, "has stolen valuable territorial surveys and has corrupted honest legal proceedings with her lies." Several of the residents nodded in agreement. Garrett's name, his reputation, carried immense weight throughout the territory. For years, his word had been the law. The courthouse doors opened. Judge Matthews stepped out onto the porch, his own federal documents held firmly in his hand. "Federal authority supersedes territorial jurisdiction in this matter, Judge Garrett." The crowd turned as one, a sea of confused and anxious faces. "This woman is under federal protection as a material witness in an ongoing investigation," Matthews declared, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "Federal protection?" Garrett's voice was sharp with challenge and scorn. "Based on what authority, Inspector?" "Based on her brave cooperation in a federal investigation of widespread territorial corruption," Matthews shot back, unfolding his official credentials so the federal eagle was visible to all. "An investigation that now includes systematic mining fraud, bribery, and judicial misconduct at the highest levels." The crowd stirred uneasily, a low murmur spreading through the ranks. Federal investigations were serious. They meant serious charges, the kind of charges that could destroy powerful careers and permanently alter the political landscape of the entire territory. Garrett studied Matthews, his eyes cold and calculating. He recognized a worthy opponent. "You're claiming federal jurisdiction over local, territorial mining disputes." "I'm claiming jurisdiction over federal crimes committed on territorial land." Matthews gestured toward the courthouse behind him. "Crimes that have been documented by 3 years of meticulous, undeniable record-keeping." "Records stolen by a fugitive slave," Garrett roared. The courthouse doors opened again. Helena emerged, carrying Mercy's precious surveys. She was followed by Mercy herself. Mercy's satchel was slung over her shoulder, a symbol of her evidence, and her bearing was no longer that of a fugitive, but of a confident, determined witness. "Records preserved by a legal witness to systematic fraud." Helena's voice cut through the tension. "A witness who documented every illegal transaction, every falsified claim, and every bribed official who took your dirty money, Judge Garrett." The crowd's attention focused entirely on Mercy. They measured this calm, composed woman against Garrett's furious accusations, and for the first time, doubt began to creep into their eyes. "I am not stolen property." Mercy's voice rang out, clear and steady, across the silent square. I am a free woman with legal documentation. I am a married woman under territorial law, and I am testifying under the full protection of the United States federal government. You are a thief and a liar, Garrett snarled, taking a menacing step forward, his territorial marshals flanking him like loyal dogs. Those surveys belong to legitimate territorial businesses. These surveys, Mercy countered, pulling a specific document from her satchel, document your extensive criminal activities. She held it up for all to see. This one shows 3 years of falsified mining claims, stolen from legitimate prospectors, filed under forged federal authority, which you did not possess. The crowd pressed closer, sensing the magnitude of the accusations. If what she said was true, Garrett's crimes had touched every mining operation, every family in the territory. Prove it! Garrett's challenge was a desperate, confident roar. He believed his power was absolute. Mercy didn't flinch. She spread the most damaging survey across a nearby rain barrel, turning it into a makeshift table for the whole town to see. This is a mining claim you filed in March of 1866. It shows the deposit boundaries extending 500 yards into federally protected land. She pointed to the specific markings, her finger steady. And this is your signature, authorizing the illegal extraction of minerals beyond your territorial jurisdiction, a federal crime. That proves nothing, Garrett blustered. It proves you committed federal crimes, Helena interjected, producing a file of correspondence. And these are your letters to the mining companies, promising them federal cooperation and protection that you had absolutely no authority to provide. That is conspiracy and fraud. Judge Matthews added his own evidence, his voice calm and devastating. And our own federal investigation confirms systematic fraud affecting 37 legitimate mining claims across the whole of the Colorado Territory. The territorial marshals behind Garrett exchanged uncertain, nervous glances. They were lawmen. They understood the difference between a territorial dispute and a federal crime. They understood that federal prosecution was beyond Garrett's power to influence, bribe, or control. Citizens of Pine Ridge. Garrett turned his appeal back to the crowd, his voice pleading now. These federal agents are interfering with legitimate territorial justice. They seek to protect criminals who steal from honest, hardworking businesses. We seek to prosecute criminals who steal from honest, hardworking prospectors, Matthews countered, his voice rising in power, including and especially territorial judges who abuse their sacred authority for their own personal profit. The crowd was now completely divided. Some still clung to the familiar authority of Judge Garrett, while others recognized the undeniable weight of the federal evidence. Pine Ridge was choosing sides, and in doing so, they were deciding the future of their territory. Arrest that woman! Garrett screamed, his composure finally cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at Mercy. Federal protection does not and will not override my territorial warrants. It does when the territorial warrants are proven to be falsified, Helena shouted, producing another document with a flourish. It was Captain Morrison's signed confession. Your own captain of the regulators has admitted, under oath, to receiving illegal orders directly from you to fabricate these charges. The marshals froze. They were caught between competing authorities, trapped on crumbling legal ground. This was the final straw. Stand down, marshals, Judge Matthews addressed the territorial officers directly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Federal warrants supersede territorial authority in any case involving federal crimes. You have no federal warrants for me? Garrett's voice was a desperate last-ditch defense. Judge Matthews slowly, deliberately, pulled out one last official document. It bore the heavy, embossed seal of the United States federal government. Samuel Garrett, he read in a loud, clear voice that echoed through the silent square. You are under arrest for mining fraud, judicial corruption, and conspiracy to violate the federal laws of the United States. A collective gasp swept through the square. Garrett's face went bone white. He saw the trap closing around him, the trap he had never believed could exist. This is territorial jurisdiction, he stammered, backing away toward his wagon. You have no authority here. We have complete authority, Helena said, signaling to the federal agents who had quietly positioned themselves around the square during the confrontation. Washington has authorized a full territorial reform before any statehood proceedings can continue. Garrett looked at his marshals, his eyes pleading. One by one, they took a step back, away from their former boss. They were unwilling to face federal charges, unwilling to go down with a sinking ship. The judge, the man who had wielded the law like a sword and a shield for years, the man who had controlled the fate of the entire territory, suddenly stood utterly and completely alone. The federal hearing convened in the Pine Ridge Courthouse at high noon. It wasn't a trial in the traditional sense. It was a formal presentation of evidence for the federal record. With Judge Matthews presiding, the small courtroom became the stage for the most significant territorial corruption case in Colorado's history. Residents packed every available seat, standing in the aisles and spilling out into the hallway, silent witnesses to history. Federal stenographers sat poised, their pencils scratching furiously, recording the testimony that would reshape their future. Mercy took the witness stand, not as a defendant, but as the chief witness for the federal government. Her leather satchel sat on the table before her. One by one, she presented the documents, her voice clear and unwavering as she detailed 3 years of Judge Garrett's systematic fraud. Each accusation was supported by specific evidence, precise dates, and Garrett's own arrogant signature. On May 14, 1865, she stated, indicating the relevant survey, Judge Garrett instructed me to falsify the survey boundaries on the Morrison Creek mining claim, specifically to move the northern boundary marker by 200 yards to illegally include a silver lode that was on federally protected land. Helena Cross, acting as the federal prosecutor, presented the corroborating evidence from her own long investigation. We have records showing that 12 additional mining claims, all filed by companies with financial ties to Judge Garrett, show identical boundary falsifications, all bearing the judge's official authorization. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as the sheer scope of the corruption became clear. This wasn't just one or two bad deals. Garrett had been systematically looting the territory, using his judicial authority to legitimize theft on a massive industrial scale. Next, Ezra took the stand. His background as a former territorial deputy gave his testimony a heavy professional weight. He described Morrison's relentless pursuit, the threats, the illegal detention attempts, and the clear violation of federal territorial law. Captain Morrison admitted to me personally that he was receiving his orders directly from Judge Garrett, Ezra testified, his steady gaze fixed on the packed courtroom. He was operating with falsified warrants for the express purpose of kidnapping a federal witness and seizing federal evidence. Judge Matthews reviewed Morrison's signed confession, obtained during his federal arrest the day before. The document was damning, implicating Garrett in conspiracy charges that carried a minimum 20-year prison sentence. Captain Morrison has provided his complete cooperation with federal investigators, Matthews announced to the silent courtroom. His testimony confirms a pattern of systematic judicial corruption and intimidation spanning the last 3 years. Garrett sat at the defendant's table, a sullen, diminished figure. His former power had evaporated under the bright, hot light of federal jurisdiction. His loyal territorial marshals facing their own charges had abandoned him completely. These accusations are fabricated, Garrett finally burst out, rising to his feet. His voice lacked its usual commanding boom. They are the desperate lies of criminals seeking to avoid their own legitimate punishment. This woman is a thief who stole valuable territorial property. Mrs. Stone is a legal witness whose meticulous documentation has proven your vast criminal activities beyond any doubt, Helena countered coolly, presenting another thick file of evidence. And our federal investigation has independently verified every single one of her accusations. The hearing continued through the afternoon. Witness after witness took the stand, each one adding another layer to the mountain of evidence against Garrett. Legitimate prospectors described having their claims stolen out from under them through legal trickery. Territorial clerks tearfully admitted to accepting bribes to lose or alter crucial documents. Representatives from 2 major mining companies offered federal immunity, confessed to entering into illegal agreements with the judge. During the lunch recess, Garrett made his last desperate move. 3 of his remaining loyalists, bailiffs who had worked in his court for years, cornered Mercy in the hallway outside the courtroom. They claimed they were acting under an emergency territorial authority to arrest her immediately. Their plan was simple and brutal: remove the key witness before the final, damning testimony could conclude. "You're coming with us, girl," the lead bailiff snarled, grabbing Mercy's arm in a bruising grip. "Judge's orders." Ezra appeared as if from nowhere, a silent shadow. His hand was resting on the grip of his Colt sidearm. "Let her go. She's under federal protection." "Federal protection don't mean a damn thing if she ain't here to claim it," the bailiff sneered, tightening his grip on Mercy's arm. Suddenly, Helena Cross emerged from the courtroom, flanked by the two powerful federal marshals. "Release that federal witness immediately," she commanded, her voice like cracking ice. "We have territorial authority." "Orte?" The bailiff blustered, but his confidence was gone. "You have nothing," Helena said, producing 3 freshly signed federal arrest warrants. "You are all under arrest and facing federal conspiracy charges for attempting to kidnap a federal witness and obstruct a federal investigation." The confrontation drew the entire crowd out into the hallway. Everyone understood that this raw, tense moment would determine whether federal law or the old, corrupt territorial system would prevail in Colorado. "Stand down now or face federal prosecution," one of the federal marshals said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Choose very, very carefully." The lead bailiff looked from the unyielding faces of the federal marshals to the determined eyes of Helena Cross. He saw the cold reality of his situation. He was out of moves. He released Mercy's arm. "This isn't over," he muttered, retreating. "Oh yes," Helena said, signaling for the marshals to take them into custody. "It is. Conspiracy to obstruct federal justice carries a sentence of 20 years in a federal prison. For you, the law is just beginning." The afternoon session resumed, with Garrett's support network completely and utterly collapsed. His last loyal men were in federal custody. His territorial authority was officially suspended. His criminal network was exposed, shattered, and destroyed. The evidence presented here today demonstrates a pattern of systematic corruption affecting the entire territorial mining system, Judge Matthews summarized, his voice resonating with the weight of historical judgment. Judge Samuel Garrett used his powerful position to steal legitimate mining claims worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, defrauding both the citizens of this territory and the United States government. Mercy provided her final testimony, describing the full scope of Garrett's criminal enterprise. She spoke of the forged documents, the bribed officials, and the intimidated witnesses that had enabled 3 long years of systematic theft. "I documented everything," she concluded, addressing not the judge, but the packed courtroom, the people of her new home, because someone needed to preserve the honest records. The prospectors and citizens of this territory deserved legal protection from the corruption that was poisoning their future. The verdict was swift, decisive, and comprehensive. Samuel Garrett was stripped of his judgeship and sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison without the possibility of parole. His co-conspirators received similar sentences. All stolen mining claims were to be immediately returned to their legitimate owners. "Federal oversight will continue throughout the statehood transition," Matthews announced to the suddenly cheering courtroom. "The Colorado Territory will enter the Union with clean governance and a transparent, fair legal system for all." The courtroom erupted in thunderous applause. The residents who had suffered under Garrett's corruption for years were finally free. Pine Ridge was free from the judicial tyranny that had held their lives and futures in its iron grip. Outside the courthouse, as the evening light softened the rugged landscape, Mercy and Ezra stood together. Their marriage of necessity, forged in a blizzard out of desperation and fear, had evolved into a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared struggle. "What happens now?" Mercy asked quietly, watching the federal agents escorting a shackled, broken Garrett toward a prison wagon. "Now," Ezra said, gesturing toward the stacks of mining claims spread across Helena's table on the courthouse porch, "we build something honest. Your surveys, Mercy, they just became the foundation for the legitimate development of this entire territory." Helena approached them, a smile finally reaching her tired eyes. She held a set of official documents. "This is the federal compensation for your cooperation," she said, handing them to Mercy. "Plus this." She handed over another paper. "Official recognition as the new territorial surveyor." The papers made Mercy one of the highest-ranking technical officials in the Colorado Territory, with full authority over all future mining surveys and geological assessments. From escaped slave to territorial surveyor in less than a week, Mercy murmured, a slow smile spreading across her face. From desperate fugitive to respected citizen, Ezra corrected gently, his hand finding hers. You were never what they claimed you were, Mercy. The sun set over Pine Ridge, illuminating a community finally free from the darkness of corruption, ready to join the Union as an honest state, built on the foundations of legitimate law, transparent governance, and the courage of a few good people. 1 year later, Pine Ridge was almost unrecognizable. The once struggling frontier settlement had transformed into a thriving, bustling territorial town. New brick buildings lined the main street. The sounds of construction and commerce filled the air. Legitimate mining operations, running honestly and openly, dotted the surrounding mountains. The corrupt, broken system that had strangled honest development was gone, a bad memory replaced by a future bright with promise. Mercy Stone stood atop the ridge overlooking her own mining claim, a tripod with surveying equipment set up at her feet. Her official territorial surveyor badge gleamed in the brilliant morning sunlight. The leather satchel that had once held the dangerous evidence of Garrett's corruption now held the maps and plans for her and Ezra's own legitimate, prosperous operation. The eastern boundary looks promising, Ezra's voice called out. He climbed the last few feet of the slope, carrying core samples from their latest excavation. Your geological assessments were perfect. There's a rich silver vein just where you predicted. Their claim was modest but honest, filed through the proper federal channels, and surveyed according to the strict new territorial regulations she herself had helped write. Every boundary marker was precisely placed. Every federal requirement was completely satisfied. A familiar figure approached from the settlement below. It was Helena Cross, now wearing the formal robes of a federal territorial judge. Her appointment had been unanimous, supported by the very residents who had witnessed her courage and integrity during the corruption trials. The Federal Statehood Commission arrives from Washington next week, Helena announced as she reached them, carrying a portfolio of official correspondence. It's a formality at this point. Colorado's application for statehood has been officially approved. The news was everything. Statehood meant permanent federal oversight, established and fair legal systems, and lasting protection from the kind of systemic corruption that had plagued the territory for decades. Judge Matthews has recommended me for the new state surveyor position, Mercy said, indicating an official letter among the documents Helena carried. It meant complete authority over all mining surveys and geological assessments for the foreseeable future. You've earned it, Mercy, Helena said, a genuine warm smile on her face as she looked at the transformation of her friend. Your documentation, your courage, it didn't just break Garrett's network. It gave this entire territory a chance at an honest future. Ezra examined the federal correspondence with obvious pride. His wife had become one of the most respected and influential technical officials in the West, known for her sharp expertise and trusted for her unshakable integrity. Morrison's testimony helped convict 12 more territorial officials. Helena provided an update on the ongoing federal prosecutions. It turns out Garrett's corruption network extended into 3 other territories. Your evidence started a fire that is cleansing the entire region. What about Garrett? Ezra asked. A federal prison in Kansas. 20 years, without the possibility of parole. Helena's satisfaction was evident. He will never influence politics in this part of the country again. The morning work continued as they surveyed the final boundaries of their claim. Mercy's precise measurements and deep geological knowledge had identified a silver deposit that would provide them with a comfortable, honest income for years to come. The federal compensation was generous, Ezra noted, indicating the new high-quality equipment and supplies that surrounded their operation. Washington wanted to send a clear message, Helena explained. They wanted to demonstrate their full support for honest territorial development. The federal government had provided substantial financial support for all the victims of Garrett's corruption, including funds for legitimate mining equipment and legal business establishment. Their operation, like dozens of others, was completely self-sufficient and professionally managed. "3 dozen mining claims have been fully restored to their rightful owners so far," Helena said, reviewing her territorial records. "Your original surveys provided the irrefutable evidence we needed to sort out the legitimate boundaries from Garrett's fraudulent claims." Below them, Pine Ridge bustled with productive activity. The courthouse was a beacon of legitimate territorial business. New shops and services catered to the honest mining operations. Federal oversight ensured a transparent system of governance that protected everyone's interests, not just those of the rich and powerful. "Judge Matthews is recommending Pine Ridge to be the new state capital," Helena shared. "The information still confidential. The Federal Commission is deeply impressed by our clean governance and our rapid, legitimate economic development." The possibility was thrilling. State capital status would bring permanent federal offices, a surge in population, and economic opportunities that would benefit the entire region for generations. "The citizens are requesting a town celebration for our anniversary," Ezra said, a warm smile on his face as he indicated the crowd already beginning to gather in the settlement square below. "1 year since we rode into town and exposed the corruption network." Mercy looked down at the community that had become their home, the people who had chosen to stand with them during the federal trials. These people had chosen federal justice over territorial corruption, honest governance over a familiar tyranny. She turned to face her husband, her eyes shining. "We should renew our marriage vows," she said softly. "This time, for love, not just for survival." Ezra's weathered face, so often a mask of grim determination, softened with a deep and genuine affection. Their marriage, a desperate contract made in a blizzard, had been forged in the fires of shared trials and a common purpose. It had grown into a deep, unshakable partnership and a profound love. "Helena can officiate," he said, gesturing to their friend. "The first marriage performed by Pine Ridge's first federal judge." The celebration that afternoon brought together everyone who had stood against the corruption. Legitimate prospectors, honest territorial officials, the federal agents who had secured the town, and the proud residents of Pine Ridge gathered to witness the renewal of the vows that had started it all. 1 year ago, Helena addressed the joyful crowd from the courthouse steps. These two people entered into a marriage of desperation, a legal shield against a corrupt and broken system. Today, they renew that marriage as a covenant of love, partnership, and shared hope for the future. Mercy wore a proper wedding dress, purchased with the federal compensation money and tailored in one of Denver's finest shops. Ezra wore a new suit, his rugged mountain man appearance transformed into that of a respectable territorial businessman and a proud husband. "I promise to support your dreams and to share your challenges." Mercy spoke her vows clearly, her voice ringing with emotion, "to build something honest and lasting in this land we both love. I promise to protect your interests and to respect your independence." Ezra's voice was deep and sincere. "To be your partner in everything we create together, for all of my days." The crowd erupted in cheers as Helena pronounced them husband and wife, under the full authority of the federal territorial law they had fought so hard to uphold. Their kiss was witnessed by the entire community that had supported their fight for justice and had been saved by their courage. That evening, a quiet celebration continued as they returned to their own claim on the ridge. The future was secure. Federal statehood was on the horizon. Their business was thriving. The corruption that had threatened to destroy them was gone forever. From a fugitive and a hermit to respected officials and business owners, Mercy surveyed their accomplishments with a deep sense of satisfaction. "We built something worth protecting. We built something worth celebrating," Ezra corrected, pulling her close as the first stars began to appear in the vast, clear sky above the Colorado mountains. "Something honest, something lasting, and something that is entirely our own." Below them, Pine Ridge glowed with warm lantern light, a beacon of hope in the wilderness. It was a community transformed by courage, by justice, and by the undeniable power of truth to overcome even the deepest and most entrenched corruption. Their marriage hadn't just saved two desperate people in a storm, it had saved an entire territory's future. If you enjoyed this story of justice in the Old West, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of when the law was forged in grit and gunpowder.